each of us is more than the worst thing we have ever done. Each of us is more than the worst thing we have ever done. When we hear this proclaimed by civil rights lawyer Bryan Stevenson, we hear the resonant clarity of truth like a bell, waking us from our judgments, from our desire to distance ourselves from evil over there. To hear someone who has defended death row inmates say these words liberates us to love ourselves more. Can it be okay in Unitarian Universalism to call ourselves sinners? Not against God, but against each other? To recognize in each other someone trying to get it right and failing, and also someone who has exploited another, and also someone who has shunned another, taken advantage of someone's kindness, or worse, perhaps someone who has done much worse. As Unitarian Universalists, we are the theological children of Reverend William Ellery Channing, who in 1819 shook the foundations of American Christianity when he preached his infamous Baltimore sermon, declaring a loving and not damning God, rejecting the idea that Jesus' death atoned for all humanity, and determined that the center of people's lives is their own moral conscience. From love we are born, to love we shall return. Of Channing's legacy, Reverend Jan Eller Isaacs offers a powerful image for us to consider. So bear with me now for a minute as we go into this image about redwood trees. See, redwood trees reproduce in a number of ways. The most common way that redwoods reproduce is for new growth to sprout where ancestral trees once stood. This life-generating, dead or dying tree is called the root crown. Have you ever been in a cathedral of redwood trees? Often, among them, you will find an opening with trees ringing the circle of what was at one time a grandparent tree, now no longer visible. If you look up, you see the high branches touching one another, reaching to the sky. The roots are also intertwined underground, woven together, sharing nutrients. Today, we too circle the root crown and call it Channing. For from that root crown grew a circle of reformers across history, across American history particularly, who envisioned and inspired the progressive movement we today inherit. We can trace a shift of consciousness that begins among those inspired by Channing's ministry. After he gave that foundation-shaking sermon in 1819, and one can still hear Channing's voice echoing in the words we recite in so many of our Unitarian Universalist congregations today, written by James Villa Blake in 1894. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This may not be a creed, but these are the words I repeated as a child every Sunday at the Third Unitarian Church of Austin, Chicago, and then later on as a high school student in Knoxville, Tennessee. Those were the opening words of the congregation. And so, in that story I have shared with you before, in 2008, when someone walked into that congregation with a gun and killed 2 people in my beloved congregation, and people in my life were present that day. That happened. And then later, when the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Bill Sinkford, showed up in Knoxville, a member of the press asked him a single question about the shooter. Somebody in the local news, but I think it was broadcast nationally, asked Bill, "Do Unitarian Universalists, are you going to send that shooter to hell?" And Bill looked into the camera and he said, "We do not need to send this man to hell." Someone with that much hate in their heart, no, we believe he is already there. This is what Unitarian Universalists believe. And that was an echo of Channing's love of humanity, of Channing's belief in our salvation and what we talked about last week, making heaven or hell right here on earth. This is our work, and it takes faith enough. So now back to that covenant. But what if we are not dwelling together in peace? I mean, do we deny this has ever happened? Did we sing Kumbaya at every board meeting? Have we remembered what we stand for at every conflict? I mean, I'll answer it for you. No. No, we have not. We at UUCA have been petty and selfish. We have been judgmental. We have thought, it would be easier if somebody would simply conform to our limited understanding of gender. Wouldn't it just be easier? We haven't always bothered to learn the names and full identities of the BIPOC members of our congregation or the Black women on staff. We have dug in our heels when we might have otherwise softly supported another's idea. We have talked just to hear our own voice. We have been cruel on the internet, which is the same thing as being cruel in life. And we have done worse than that. Much worse. So what is love to do with us? What do we owe to ourselves or to God or to something beyond or to the community which is beyond us? When we cast out original sin and the redemptive death of Jesus from our theology, did we also relinquish with it any chance at our own redemption? Exploring sin seemed like a good week to return to the canto of Dante Alighieri, the Inferno, his fictional journey through the circles of hell with the philosopher Virgil by his side. And I was talking about this with Jason Delaney, who reminded me of Dante's Inferno at this moment, and it struck us that when he reaches the 9th circle, the lowest layer farthest from heaven, reserved for the worst, which in Dante's Inferno means traitors to their most loyal cause, the worst sin. Their punishment is being frozen in a lake of ice for all eternity. The most severe spiritual punishment imaginable is to be frozen, that is, stuck. Never offered the chance to grow, learn, transform, or become better. Simply frozen forever in the act of betrayal to one's deepest commitment. This image of hell as being separated and frozen out, well, that is the thing we all fear most right here on earth, in our own lives, in our community. Our fear of being set apart from our chosen family is so powerful. We have eschewed an entire doctrine of sin from our faith, acting as though it can't exist wherever grace is found. I say this carefully, as someone who was raised by a loving, affirming family in a loving, affirming congregation. But we need to embrace a humanist theology of sin. Because if we are to understand ourselves as seekers, as lifelong learners, as our sacred principles define us, then we can accept the pain of growth and transformation that we will sometimes miss the mark. There will come a day when you will belittle someone out of a desire to be right. You will overpower someone because you are accustomed to being in power. You will ignore someone who needs you. You will disrespect, or worse, violate someone's boundaries. And not if, but when that happens, we need to know what comes next. This requires almost superhuman levels of self-compassion. Not one, but 2 self-compassion meditations in a day, every day, an inner monologue of self-love, maybe even a little humor. Yeah, I'm messed up again. Still working on it. Without a communal process and an understanding of yourself as a beloved work in progress, well, you can become frozen in your own shame, or frozen in time, in ego, unable to grow and learn. It is a struggle to find a way back to covenant with others when you are frozen. When the memoirist Glennon Doyle writes about getting sober, she calls it defrosting. Defrosting is excruciatingly painful. You have been numb for so long, she writes. As feeling comes back to your soul, you start to tingle, and it's uncomfortable and strange. But then the tingles start feeling like daggers. Sadness, loss, fear, anger, anxiety. All of these things that you have been numbing, you feel them all for the first time. And it is horrific at first, to tell you the damn truth, but welcoming the pain and refusing to escape from it is the only way to recovery. Like that children's book we read to our twins again and again, going on a bear hunt. You can't go around it. You can't go over it. You have to go through it. And as Glennon Doyle says, we can do hard things. One of my favorite Unitarian ministers has a banner on the front of the congregation, in front of the building, that reads, "We can do hard things." I think they made t-shirts, actually, that say, "We can do hard things," and congregation, we can do hard things. But without a communal process of returning to covenant, how do we know what is the next right thing? For Unitarian Universalists, sin is not against God, but against each other. We are people of covenant. We have covenanted to treat each other with dignity and respect. As Reverend Victoria Safford says, covenant is the work of intimate justice. With that in mind, we Unitarian Universalists are collectively considering adding an 8th principle to our 7 principles of our faith. The proposed 8th UU principle would call us to affirm our journey toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. That word, accountability, means we must measure, take stock, not once, to dismantle racism and oppression, not in word only, but in deed. Not once. Not only during the meeting, not only during Sunday worship, not only during Black History Month, not only during Black Lives Matter protests, but every day, all day, in every interaction. And I hate to tell you, we will not always live up to this. We will get it wrong. We will disappoint and offend each other. But those of us who were raised in this faith, like Kay's son, Sean, were raised in UU youth groups who were used to calling out, ouch, if someone committed a microaggression. Then that person could respond with oops, and then the group would work through it together. It was embarrassing, awkward, it was hard, but it was salvific. It saved us from ourselves, from becoming frozen, locked into our isolation and our limitation. Let us begin the defrosting process. We might commit a selfish offense. We might say something sexist, something racist, something cruel. Let the people say, ouch. Hey, they did it. I hope you did that at home. Let the people say, ouch. Let us hear, yes, a confession. Let those who were not the victims of the microaggression hear that confession. You know, this is something the pastor is still good for. I can hear confession. Look, I may not have a penance to offer you, but I might. We might need to go back to the drawing board. We might need to hit the books. Together, we might need to feel obsolete for a little while, to humble ourselves, and then, with self-compassion, scrape ourselves up off the ground and begin again in love. Because we know deep in our souls the simple truth that each of us is more than the worst thing we have ever done. We contain multitudes. As Kenny Wiley said, we, all of us, we make people smile and we hurt deeply. We show up for our friends and we steal things. We save lives and break hearts and laws. We sin and we save. We do unforgivable things. We commit unbelievable good. We are more than any one thing, any one moment, any one triumph, any one mistake, and we all deserve to live. Our covenant calls us not to freeze each other out, not to cast each other out, but to call each other in, to help one another. For the sinner, there is always the chance to turn back, to learn more, to do better. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is how we do the next right